Hello there, I'm Bruce Arnold. I'd like to talk to you about my new course, 3-Note Modal Sequencing. Really, modal sequencing is looking at patterns, and what we're going to use for these patterns is scales. And there's 29 different scales here, so a lot of different scales. You have the modes of major, you have the modes of melodic, minor, ascending. You have 3 symmetrical scales, diminished, symmetrical, diminished, and whole tone. You have, of course, the major and minor pentatonic and the blues scale. And then you have the modes of harmonic major. With all these scales, you're really preparing yourself for any musical situation that you might run into. Now, I've gone through all these scales many times, and I can tell you that 3-note modal sequences is very important because you have so many melodies out there that actually use 3-note sequences or patterns. Just take a look at Bach's music and you'll see it all over the place. But, also most people that improvise are using some sort of pattern within their playing at some point. The other great thing about going through these modal sequences is it really makes sure you know the scale. If you can play the scale moving up a fifth and a minor third and move through the whole scale, then yeah, you know this scale. Also, for many of my students that are, learning how to improvise, having all these patterns is great because you can just pick out one pattern and say, okay, I'm going to apply that today to just, soloing over whatever you might choose. So that's something I highly recommend with this course. Just don't just go through and just play everything and never apply it, because then you're never going to have it in your playing. So when I go through modal sequencing, I might play 2 or 3 sequences and then I'll pick one and I'll say, okay, I'm just going to concentrate on that. I put on some jam track or I make one myself, and then I just try to get musical with it, which I'll show you some examples of that in a minute here. Also, this has got a lot of ear training stuff. Basically every sequence is made into a MP3, so you could just put that on and just listen to it. What I would recommend is having them all in one key to start with, so that you kind of know the key. And that's not going to be too bad for some of the scales, but once you get into the melodic, minor, ascending, harmonic, major scales, even the diminished whole tone scales, it's a little harder to recognize this and keep in a key center. So if you're having problems staying in a key center, then I would say use the metrodrone to create a key center while you're listening to these various sequences. But what's going on here is that you have to start getting to the point where you're recognizing patterns, because once music starts moving quicker and quicker, it gets harder and harder to be able to use your ear training to figure out what the notes are, because they're moving by faster than you can even think. But your mind can recognize patterns. So if you start recognizing all these different patterns that you're hearing in this 3-note modal sequencing course, that will really help you to say, okay, yeah, they're using that pattern and it's moving with through a Lydian scale or whatever it might be. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of examples of how to apply the 3-note modal sequencing.